All right, we're live. Blessedly little happening in actual Texans news today. So we have a whole lot of suggestions via mock trades, free agency, targets via articles in ESPN. Matt Bowen, guy I really respect a lot, pointed out some free agents the Texans might really like. So I'm just enjoying yet another week where the Texans are have an offseason where there's not a whole lot of tabloid-worthy stuff to write about. And it's nice. It's really, really nice to sit here with a draft pick to stress over. I did see this in Battle Red blog, which is a good Texans website, and I believe that they were just summing up a Channel 2 interview of Matt Schaub. But I thought Matt Schaub said something interesting about DeMeco Ryans that I think sometimes people are skeptical of. So I just wanted to discuss it a little bit since there aren't any genuine news items today. And it was this, that he was talking about DeMeco's credibility and authenticity. He's going to be that way all the time. That's who he is. He's sat in those seats in the exact same room. He's walked in their footsteps. That carries a lot of weight. He coached at a high level in San Francisco. He has that track record as a coach. You can't help but respect that and bust your tail for a coach like that. He's seen it. He knows what it should look like. You're going to buy into it, and he's going to bring the best out of you. That's I think sometimes it kind of goes the same way as it is with players in the media. You know, sometimes former players in the media don't actually have a damn clue what they're talking about. I always strive really hard not to be one of those guys, but it's not just a given that because a guy was a former player that, hey, he's going to be a player's coach. I always think of Jerry Richardson, who was the owner for the Panthers, was a former NFL player, and he almost went out of his way to be sure that he was the biggest bastard towards the players. I think is lest he be perceived as weak or something because he was a former player having too much sympathy. That was the way he operated. Sometimes coaches are a little bit like that. I think the big advantage you have in a coach, and DeMeco has demonstrated this already, if you're a former NFL player, is that I think you have you've got an awareness of what guys are going through, and more than anything, you have an awareness of how different guys are different. You know, as a coach, as a teacher, sometimes you start thinking about your team almost like it's one big lump form, like these guys are responding, these guys are not responding. As a player, you really understand that, man, everybody's different. And just like it is in high school football, you got some guys on your team that are trying to do the right thing all the time. You got other guys that aren't. You got some guys that are motivated by yelling and screaming. You got other guys that'll shut it down if you yell and scream at them. So I think sometimes players maybe have a more recent memory of that because guys that didn't play in the NFL maybe sometimes think of NFL players more differently than they should. They don't necessarily remember that they're humans. The other part of it too, and I think I talked about this weekend on the live stream, is that sometimes players like DeMeco, I think, have a better sense for what is BS and what is not BS. What do you actually have to worry about and what don't you have to worry about? And I think that in a weird way, it's a comparison to Bill Belichick, because I think Belichick actually does a good job of not necessarily wasting a whole lot of time on BS, which for him includes press conferences, so he doesn't like to do that. I think the other thing, too, if we move on, is we starting to get into some of the other issues. This was something that caught my eye. I think the Texans Wire had this, then they had pulled it from from Pro Football Focus, and it's this. Okay, so Renner suggested that the Texans might really be interested in Will Levis because Bobby Slowick came from San Francisco. Will Levis is coming from Kentucky, where he played under two offensive coordinators from the Kyle Shanahan tree. The connection makes too much sense. Okay, I get a little bit nervous when we start thinking that way. I like it if it makes sense that perhaps they're going to trade back and take Will Levis. I'm not overly enthusiastic about Will Levis, partly because for a guy that runs, he's been banged up an awful lot. I don't like having to make excuses. This is what I don't like having to make excuses for. I don't like having to make excuses for a guy who played at Kentucky not being better because the talent around him wasn't as good and or because he was banged up. You know, I'm supposed to be worried about Bryce Young's injury history, not Will Levis's. As far as Levis having played in the system, there could be something to that if you consider that Trey Lance, when he was in college, played in a similar system, doing a lot of the same things that Kubshanistani offense is going to do. I don't know. Like Trey Lance was also, I think, a more magnificently upside type of guy in terms of physical skills than Will Levis is. I'm going to go with the brain and the quarterbacking stuff mattering more than familiarity within the system, especially for a rookie quarterback. So I'm not buying it completely. I'm not throwing it out the window. Who knows exactly how these guys are thinking about it? I'm just not overly enthusiastic about Will Levis. Wild Thing Music says Will Levis is equal to Davis Mills. Goodness gracious. All right. Although, okay, that was an idea we had the other day. In this day and age, the way things are going with quarterbacks, where it used to be that you wanted to see 4 years of starting experience out of a college quarterback. Then we know we got something. Now teams are getting way more aggressive, obviously. It might make sense if you're a burgeoning young stud of a quarterback in high school right now to go to a North Dakota State or, Josh Allen, Carson Wentz, Trey Lance, like all these guys go to smaller schools or FCS schools and or even some of the lesser conferences in 1A, and guys they're getting drafted based on upside. And I don't know. It's not what I want my guys drafting, but so be it. As far as free agents, okay, this is where Matt Bowen, who I respect a lot, had an article in ESPN Plus, which, by the way, ESPN Plus is worth it, and yet I don't know if there's an app out there that tries harder to make it impossible for you to log in once you pay for premium content. So Matt Bowen, former NFL player. After I just told you to watch out for these former NFL players in the media, Matt Bowen's one of the good ones. He works his butt off. He also coaches high school football still. He was a defensive back in the NFL, and he's a real bright guy. He suggested, amongst others, these guys as the best free agency fits. He was doing best free agents. I think the top 50 free agents, their best fits were by team. And Jacoby Myers is who he recommended. The Texans will be in position to draft a rookie quarterback with their number 2 pick. Myers is a fit here as a nuanced route runner with a 6'2" frame. And he's, considered an intermediate option with outside flex, although he can stretch defenses on deep overs or crossers. I get a little bit nervous about that, just in that if I'm going to be paying premium dollars and I have all these draft picks, I might want to wait on getting a genuinely premium guy, an equivalent of last year's A.J. Brown trade or a Tyreek Hill trade. Whatever that trade ends up being this year, if you draft a rookie quarterback, I think the time is now. You don't wait. I know a lot of you are hesitant to draft a quarterback specifically because you feel the Texans isn't talented enough yet. I think that's when you don't waste a year of that rookie quarterback's rookie contract by waiting for the right guy to come around or by spending a good amount of money on Jacoby Myers. I think that you go ahead, like in this year's rookie free agency class, premium free agency class. Oh gosh, I just shuffled these in here, by the way. I was going to talk about Odell Beckham Jr. after the Texans targets. Odell Beckham Jr. he's got going to the Cowboys. I know what Bowen is talking about there. I feel like the Cowboys are perpetually on kind of that teetering edge of there's kind of what's it called when a nuclear explosion is ready, a critical moment where all of a sudden there's too many issues or risks on a football team, and Dallas always has to be careful about doing that. And I just don't know how willing Odell Beckham Jr. is to grow old gracefully. I think doing what I think he's shown maybe might be best for him is be one of these the guys that are emerging now where they pop up like right around mid-season on a playoff team, and they just bide their time. They get paid really good money for 1 year, maybe get a ring, and there you go. Brady Langston says DEFCON 1, perhaps. Was I? Okay. Yeah, DEFCON 1 is the worst one, right? Because you always get it wrong. You assume DEFCON 5 is the worst. DEFCON 1 is actually the worst. So, yeah, maybe they're near DEFCON 1 with potential issues. And I don't know if Mike McCarthy's the guy to handle those issues. He ruined Aaron Rodgers. The boy was an altar boy before McCarthy got to him. Jacoby Myers, we already discussed. You can see this was a brilliant display of organization by me. Okay, Marcus Davenport. This is where it starts getting interesting. There's going to be 2 defensive ends here. I'm curious what your guys' thoughts are on the 2 defensive linemen that were mentioned here by Matt Bowen as potential free agency fits. Okay, two questions. One, is Marcus Davenport worth the money you might have to spend? I think yes. I think at the impact positions right now, I think that you're actually going to be – I don't think they need to stretch at cornerback right now. I think they can make some reasonable moves there as long as you're kind of crossing your fingers for Derek Stingley. I think linebacker, they're very intrigued by Christian Harris, I would imagine, but they're still open to possibilities. But that's DeMeco's coming from a place where they had a 2nd rounder and a 5th rounder as really, really good off-ball linebackers. So Marcus Davenport, I think, can still very much get it done. I think he's big enough for what they need. He's not as muscled up as Nick Bosa is kind of just a freak anyway. But I think he might be a really good fit. And this is where DeMeco Ryans really pays off, I think. I think if we had this conversation a month ago, people would say, look, Davenport's not going to want to come here. None of these guys are going to come here. I think with DeMeco Ryans giving the pep talk and talking about how Davenport could be deployed, I think it could work out really well. And I think the other thing that people are sleeping on a little bit, because nobody was paying attention to the Texans outside of Houston, Jerry Hughes is still an effective pass rusher. He's going to be 35 years old, but he's under contract for 1 more year. Okoronkwo is a free agent, but I wonder if Okoronkwo, who went through a little bit of what Jason Babin did. When Jason Babin left Houston, he'd been miscast as a 3-4 defensive end. For you youngsters, or for a 3-4 outside linebacker. For you youngsters, Jason Babin was a kid out of Central Michigan that the Texans traded up out of the 2nd round into the 1st round to draft and to turn him into a 3-4 outside linebacker. And he was a bust. He just didn't work out for the Texans. He ended up leaving. I think the first team he went to was Seattle, then Philadelphia, and then Tennessee, perhaps one of those. It was an amalgamation of those teams. He turned into a 4-3, and he went to Jacksonville for a while. He turned to a 4-3 defensive end, and he was just an absolute monster. So Obo Okoronkwo kind of went through that this year, where he left a team where he was a 3-4 outside linebacker, became a 4-3 defensive end with his hand in the dirt, and it worked out really well. Okay, we haven't gotten to the other defensive end yet, but we do have Evan Ingram, not as a fit for the Texans necessarily. He's a smaller guy. He's a flex tight end, maybe you call him. And not that the Texans couldn't always use a guy like that. I don't know if Brevin Jordan's going to work out. We'll find out this year. But I think just as an example of, hey, the marquee guys aren't always the guys that make the biggest difference. Evan Ingram was a really, really good signing by the Texans this year. And for one that they got a lot of criticism for. But if you think about the the Jaguars offseason, the Jaguars last year had to pay a premium for a few of their free agents. They had to pay a tax because they were so bad coming off the Urban Meyer experience. I think this is another area where it might work out that DeMeco Ryans pays dividends there. I don't think they're necessarily going to have to pay the tax. This is the guy, Arden Key. So he played for DeMeco Ryans, 11 sacks in the past 2 seasons, and I think this is a guy that maybe we might know him a little bit better because he showed up kind of big in the playoffs, and I got excited about Arden Key in the playoffs. He can go inside and go outside. DeMeco Ryans used Charles Omenihu in San Francisco, maybe better than the Texans used him in Houston, found a better way to use him, and he's got a good feel for using guys like this. And I think the thing to remember with DeMeco's defense in San Francisco was they were very, very, very good against the run, but they didn't always play with guys that were classic run stuffers up the middle. Omenihu played inside a good amount. Arden Key would come inside, and some of these guys because they had such good linebacker play and because DeMeco encourages them to play so physically, it worked out really well. So we'll get to this one in a second. I think you guys had mentioned, somebody said Davenport was amazing. Yeah, and I'm with you there. I think that, let's see, Davenport would be amazing. Zach Allen, defensive lineman from the Cardinals. I guess I'm going to have to I need to do a defensive line. I need to do a defensive line one on the free agents and see like who the apple of my eye is this offseason. Lamont, says, will the Texans have any free agents from San Francisco or Philly on the squad next year? I only mentioned Philly because they supposedly have a bleep ton of free agents due. Yeah, and that's where Philly is right now with trying to keep that squad together. But they have that magical Jalen Hurts is a rookie and on his rookie contract. I think likewise San Francisco has Arden Key, as you had mentioned. I think that the rookie contract dynamic is a big one. The Texans have a lot of cap space. They've got also a lot of picks, though, too. And that ends up, I got to have Texans cap on here at some point to talk about that side of it. The Texans have so many draft picks that you really probably want them to either consolidate or trade into the future a little bit, because that you gotta leave aside so much cap space for some of those rookies, including 2 first-rounders. You've got your 2 first-rounders next year. It's a nice problem to have. It's the gift from Deshaun Watson that keeps on giving. But it's one that you have to account for. So I think that I expect the Texans to be strategic in free agency and maybe get, I don't want to say, Evan Ingram might be a good example of a guy that, isn't a marquee name or anything, but might fit the scheme. If you think about this scheme, the Kubshanistani system and what various tight ends, I mean, George Kittle's a 5th rounder, various running backs like Arian Foster or whomever else, they've done very, very well in these schemes over the years. Obviously, the 49ers signed McCaffrey this year, and that put everything over the top. McCaffrey was a good example of, hey, the Kubshanistani system is awesome at getting really good performances out of guys like Matt Schaub, out of guys who might be lesser running backs or lesser tight ends. But at the end of the day, a Shannon Sharp goes a long way. A John Elway goes a long way, even though he has passed his prime. And Arian Foster goes a long way. Like, adding that actual, really good star power on top of all of that goes a long way. So I think that you got to be careful in thinking that it's going to be too easy. And yet I think that they don't go over the top with, in the first round this year, there might be 3 tight ends that are worthy of taking in the first round. Given all of these guys' history, I don't know if this is the year they decide to do that. They might go for more with a Owen Daniels type. J-Rock, i.e., let's go, we're back. I think talking about the Texans itself. So this was one, since I find ways to be perpetually perturbed with the various narratives about the Texans, I had to add this. So Mike Jones, who's a good enough writer from The Athletic, and I like a lot of the stuff he writes, but whenever you do 32 things, it's a lot, and he did 32 lessons from the 2022 season. I feel like the Texans are the one that it's easiest to do the flyby on, and I feel like that's a little bit what we got right here, a flyby. Let's see. It doesn't matter how hard you get your guys to play despite facing long odds every single week. If ownership and management want a tank job and only view you as a placeholder, you're nothing more than a placeholder. This is a tough one because I got to tell you, I'm not going to argue with it. And yet I sense a tone here. I sense a tone of disapproval. And this is like the notion that Lovie Smith somehow outperformed expectations. This is the one that bothers me because the same thing happened with David Culley the year before. The over-under for the Texans the year before was 4.5 wins. I think it settled in at 4 wins before the season. And David Culley got 4 wins out of the Texans, and people acted like that was some kind of a triumph only because so many people had picked the Texans as bottom of their power ranking. So somehow the Texans, being the 2nd or 3rd worst team in the league last year, well, I guess the 3rd worst team in the league last year, was a triumph in that it was unconscionable that David Culley, after surpassing expectations, would be let go. I mean, it wasn't the case. Lovie Smith, yes, I give him 100% full credit for keeping those guys playing hard. And it could have turned into a clown show by the end of the year. We've seen this happen before. Like it could have happened with Jacksonville and Urban Meyer. That was a clown show. But Lovie Smith, because he is a genuine NFL head coach, but I think one whose time has passed, just wasn't going to be the guy, but he kept it together. They won a game at the end of the year. They slugged it out with Kansas City and Dallas. But it's it's just too simple and easy to dismiss the Texans as a team that was blaming Lovie Smith or blaming David Culley. Where I don't know, like, I didn't hear from you guys. I didn't hear from the team. I didn't hear from local media ever. Like, and honestly, I never heard them say that those two coaches were the reason the Texans were bad. It's just there's subtleties involved where you can see that a guy is hamstrung and can't win, and yet with Lovie Smith, I don't think that with his defense and the way he had Derek Stingley playing, not to mention just I think philosophically where he was with some things about modern football, I don't think he was going to be the guy. And I think Lovie Smith knew that was likely the case. You don't get hired as a show up out of nowhere finalist when the team is being sued and you've got a Deshaun Watson situation without understanding the landscape. Lovie Smith had been here the entire time. So I'm gonna try not to fixate on it too much any longer because it's just damn too annoying. But Omar says, I almost wish they had stuck with Culley for 2 seasons and then gone for DeMeco. Yeah, the Culley situation was one where I think that, if they'd hired Lovie the first year, and I think when they hired Lovie, it felt like they were open to it working out with Lovie, which I know is different than putting your full force of commitment behind a coach. But I think that maybe they were, hopeful of, hey, maybe this works out. Maybe we feel like we're simpatico and something happens. I think with David Culley, there were just too many major gaffes. And I think the big ones were when it boiled over into perhaps how Laramie Tunsil felt about the team. I mean, think about the night and day difference between Laramie Tunsil now and what it was when David Culley was the guy. And then, Justin Reed, there's never been any hint of any kind of locker room issue with Justin Reed. But when he reportedly gets into some kind of a shouting match with David Culley, and I showed you guys before, I thought the Inside the NFL guys did a pretty good job, Ryan Clark and Teddy Bruschi specifically, talking about, look, when the players know that a guy is a short timer or that he's not the guy, it's a lot tougher for that guy to command respect. I think Lovie Smith was enough of an actual NFL head coach that he could command that respect, regardless of how weird the situation was. With David Culley, I think it was hard to establish a certain culture. So that's where they screwed up. They screwed up not in hiring an interim coach per se, but they hired, and I think they set the bar too low. We've talked about this before. And 5 minutes after I said that I'm going to try to let all of that go, there we are, right back at it. So we'll move on from the Mike Jones article, although I do like The Athletic, and I like Mike Jones. Will the Bears trade the number 1 NFL draft pick? 3 potential trade offers. This one got me a little bit nervous because I do hope they draft Bryce Young. I'm not going to be besides myself with grief and rage if they don't, because I am nervous about Bryce Young's size. But the Colts have a little bit more to offer than the Texans just because, actually, I apologize. They don't necessarily have as much to offer. They would have to offer more to get up because they're sitting at number 4 where the Texans are sitting at number 2. They're suggesting here, and I believe this was in ESPN, the number 4 overall, a 2nd rounder, a 4th rounder, and a 2024 3rd rounder. The only part of the Colts moving up that would scare me is if, obviously, that FOMO of if Bryce Young really works out with Shane Steichen, and then that hurts. If they take C.J. Stroud and then the Texans take Bryce Young, and that's what the Texans actually wanted, then it feels pretty cool. And then we've got like a good old-fashioned showdown. It was one thing when the Texans drafted Mario Williams, and part of the justification for drafting Mario Williams was the thought that, hey, you got Peyton Manning in the division, you might as well have somebody that can chase Peyton Manning down. And it didn't work out. It wasn't like Mario Williams was the key to all of a sudden beating the Colts, obviously, but that was a little bit of a showdown element there. Here it would genuinely be, okay, you took that quarterback, we took this quarterback, and let's see how it works out. And Irsay's done some snotty little things before in the draft. Remember when they leapt over us, presumably to draft the speedy little wide receiver who I'm blanking on his name right now, but who ultimately ended up back with the Texans here sometime in the last couple of years. And so that one, I don't know. Everybody loses on that one. But I'm I'm scared enough of Bryce Young's injuries that that's what's keeping me from 100% falling in love with him. Not his injuries per se, but his size and the fact that he's an outlier there. So the question would be, if it came down to the Texans. Oh, that's right. Eberflus wants a 3 technique. So if they took Carter, then that would make sense. With the Texans, it would be a number 2 overall. This would be to trade up to number 1. A number 2 overall, a 3rd rounder, a 4th rounder, and a 2024 3rd rounder. Oh, that seems rich, man. To trade up into a spot that you just had, that you were a failed 2-point conversion away from from having into doing whatever you wanted. Think about right now, if the Texans, this is how I'm trying to think about it. If the Texans were sitting at number 1 overall and the Bears offered them the number 2 overall plus a 3rd rounder plus a 4th rounder and a 2024 3rd rounder, would you take it? I think I would. I think I would. That's just so much damn draft capital, and the Texans already have so much. So I think if I'm a GM, I'm standing pat. I'm nervous enough about Bryce Young's size. Somebody, we'll get to a question later about his injury history that got me thinking a little bit more than I had. The Carolina Panthers would be a number 9 overall and another couple more. They gave up a 1st rounder for the next year too, which that's the one that probably wins the deal, depending on who the Bears really, really want. So if the Bears have their eyes set on 2 of these 3 quarterbacks, let's say the Bears really want 2 of these 3 quarterbacks, then it makes sense that they would trade with the Texans. Maybe they could work their way back to the Colts with the hopes that somebody else, falls to them. And that's not as much risk. If they go all the way back to number 9, then they're going to want another 1st-round pick from the Panthers for next year. And that might end up winning the deal. And again, then it's a matter of, okay, do you want C.J. Stroud or do you just end up taking an edge rusher? I don't know. That's the fun and stressful part of it. I really hope I hope there are no leaks either. I really want to be surprised on draft night. All right, so apologies for a second. Oh, that's right. Battle Red Blog had suggested Mecole Hardman, former Kansas City Chiefs 2nd-round pick, still only 24 years old. Hardman possesses elite downfield speed, can bring an element to the Texans' offense, has not been around since Will Fuller left. I am intrigued by that. I think especially if Brandon Cooks gets traded. I saw somebody suggest Brandon Cooks to the Patriots today, and that makes a whole lot of sense. Patriots have a history with him. I don't know. Like, I'm sorry. I'm going to bring up Jack Easterby's name, and it's not even in a negative way. Jack Easterby might be of help to us if he could be our equally depressing Nathaniel Hackett. Maybe like the guy that a team hires specifically just to try to lure somebody into the fold. I think that Jack Easterby was apparently really good at his job, whatever his job was in New England, which various people described as the high five guy or the character coach or whatever. So I wouldn't be surprised if Jack Easterby ends back up there in New England. Who knows? I don't have a clue. I mean, he was making a really nice salary with the Texans. He might be holding out for reportedly a $3 million a year salary. I don't think they were paying the high five coach $3 million a year in New England, but he seemed to have a good relationship with Belichick. Kraft might have accused him of tampering. So I think that comes down to Kraft. And man, I told you I wasn't going to deal in gossip, but I'm not doing it with a sneer. Remember, up in New England, what they thought was that Jack Easterby disapproved of Bob Kraft's, let's call them massage parlor antics, whatever we want to call, whatever his deal was, which was completely consensual with the owner of the salon and one other 40-plus-year-old lady, and yet frowned upon in the NFL. Not frowned upon as much as what Deshaun Watson was alleged to have done, but frowned upon nonetheless. So I don't know. That's probably not going to work out. So we won't be able to use Jack Easterby as a lure for Brandon Cooks up there. They seem to be very fond of each other. I like the idea of Mecole Hardman. Alex, I like bringing up Lance on here because he's not my YouTube competitor. He is my radio competitor, but he's obviously very smart. Lance Erline said he wishes he got a Texans move up to number 1 ticket in Vegas because the Texans are not going to get beat for Bryce Young. Do you agree? I don't completely agree, and I know that Lance's logic makes sense. And I know at least one of them is that the Texans, or I guess specifically the Patriots, seem to be a team that cares more about actual football playing ability more so than measurables. But I think you take it to an extreme if you're saying, okay, that they don't care at all about size. Because I don't think they're quite there either. So I don't know. Now Lance spends, a week at the Senior Bowl, a week at the Combine, Lance knows what he's talking about when it comes to kind of the scuttlebutt. So for him to be as strong about that, it does make me feel at least that Bryce Young is their guy. I'm going to plug in so we don't lose each other here. I'm not a cat. Don't go away. Everything's falling apart. So I don't know if I would go as far as to say I would put money on it, but his logic is very sound. So that's what we'll see. I wouldn't do it, but if they love him and they're willing to overlook the size issue, then go for it, I'd say. If you can get, you've got other draft picks coming back too via potentially Brandon Cooks and others, and we'll see. And also, look, I don't want to leave the guys. I can't publish all these comments about Bob Kraft's tactics and antics. This is a family YouTube channel, everybody. So, what are we talking about? If they can overlook the size and whatever concerns they might have about it, and what's funny is when Sean and I had Casario on one time, he mentioned, and I pried for details, he wouldn't give them to me. He mentioned that one year in the offseason, they had discovered that, for a certain position, size really didn't matter as much as they previously thought it did. And, I tried like hell to get him to tell me whether it was offensive line or quarterback or what have you. But the fact that they know that for one position through their analytical studies would suggest that maybe they've changed their ideas about exactly how they feel about quarterbacks. So I think there's a very good chance of that. Also, Terry Kendrick. Terry, we're gonna have a good old months-long debate here. Bryce Young, oh God, please no. Terry Kendrick. Okay, we're gonna have fun with this Bryce Young thing. It's fun to care about things that actually matter instead of all the soap opera nonsense anymore. Okay, so a few questions from comments that I've seen in the YouTube after the live is gone. This is an interesting one, and I actually got to reply to C. Royce. I need to reply to C. Royce Collins here because he says Bryce Young has already had 4 AC injuries to his shoulder, throwing shoulder. I knew that he had AC injuries before, and Saban had said he'd recovered from them quickly. I was having a hard time. I looked at 5 different write-ups on Bryce Young right before this, and I did not find the specific number for. As far as the AC joint itself goes, I'm going to have Mike Ryan, my old athletic trainer from the Jaguars, on to talk about this, or maybe Kevin Bastine or one of these other guys from the Texans. But Mike Ryan does some network work now. The AC joint's an interesting one because it's one of these things that doesn't actually matter that much. And I say that, I'm going to hesitate. It doesn't matter for most athletes as much. Throwing athletes obviously are different. But there's nothing structurally that your clavicle really needs to do. It just hurts like hell, and it can click. And I've had it because I've had a few AC separations myself. And yeah, there's no way in hell I'd be throwing a football when I had one. But a lot of times it ends up being more of a pain management issue. And there are things you can do just by clipping off the end of the bone that I don't worry about him maybe being especially prone to AC joint injuries. But it does lend credence to the, hey, he's got this shoulder issue, and he got it the last time just by kind of throwing as he was falling down. I think it's a legitimate enough concern. I just don't know about the 4 times. So he says the last one was from him just hitting the ground after being tackled, not from someone falling on him. Yeah, that's another one where you could say the size perhaps had something to do with it because he he flopped down pretty hard as he was being tackled by the legs. It's only a matter of time before one of the big D-line tackles. All right, don't worry about it. It's just I thought I got bit by something. It wasn't. It's only a matter of time. Can somebody go back and grab that later and just put it on social media for me? I'm too lazy to do it. A few more will end his career. Is that an omen somehow? C. Royce Collins is telling me this. Well, I'm getting bit by mystery bugs on my carpet. Let me add that back. It says a few more will end his career definitively. I don't know if I can go there, man. For one, just about the AC joint in general, but just the certainty with which people say that he's going to get injured. When I did a video yesterday about Aaron Rodgers' best trade destination being to the Raiders, I talked about how it's sometimes hard for intellectually curious or free-thinking football players because football is a sport that rewards conformity in a lot of ways. That's why football has more military analogies. I think I talk to enough people in the military that say that they themselves use more football analogies than everything else. I don't know. I always try to stay very respectful of the military and not make many military analogies. But there's a conformity element to it, right? It's hard to be a hippie in the Marines. Probably it's easier to be a hippie in the Air Force. What's the easiest branch to be a hippie in? Or at least like a kind of a repressed hippie, like Joker in Full Metal Jacket. He was in the Marines, but he got some flack for having that peace symbol on his helmet. So he says Arian turned cerebral after they gave him the big money, just like Rodgers is now. Show me the money, then they quit on the Texans that get them there. Okay, I'm gonna disagree with that because Arian was cerebral the entire time. I think what changed was that Arian kind of got sick of all the attention for being cerebral. And I think that's where Aaron Rodgers is right now too. It's that Rodgers wanted to learn something about himself and the universe and explore many things. And I'm all for a lot of the stuff he's doing, actually. I think they're finding out some very, very interesting things with, how psychedelics can be used therapeutically, meditation, darkness retreats, all that. I'm here for it. I read a lot about that stuff. And yet, when you are in a conformity-based sport like football, it's hard to reconcile both those worlds. A lot of times guys go through this in college, and by the time they get to the NFL, they've figured it out. Largely because I think when you gain an appreciation for, just how minuscule you are in the universe and how perhaps either meaningless or meaningful life really is at the root of it all, whichever direction you go with it, you recognize okay, this playing football is a pretty good gig. And I got a whole lot of time to meditate all year long, but especially in the off season that, I'm going to go ahead and find mindfulness and peace and, working like a monk at my job. But Rodgers isn't quite at that spot right now. So I think that with Arian, it always felt like he showed up in shape. He played his butt off. He just got injured a lot. I don't think for Arian it was an issue because Arian had been kind of a questioning guy his entire life, I think. With Aaron Rodgers, it feels like he's kind of the jock that discovers it when he's 38 years old. You know what he is? I had a good friend who's a totally alpha type driven guy, very in good alpha, not like annoying guy that claims he's an alpha, but like an actual alpha, good leader, very career oriented, goal driven, all that stuff. He moved to California, and my God, it was unbearable for 2 years. He knows this now. We'll joke with him about it, but he just started I think he moved to California and he discovered weed at the same time, and all of a sudden, there was no discussion you could have with him where at some point he wasn't just asking you to chill a little bit, man. And listen, man, this stuff all works itself out eventually. And it's the equivalent, it's the hippie version of somebody that's newly saved, a born again who just found God and now all of a sudden wants to rail against all of the things that you're doing that he was also doing with you 2 weeks ago. That's what Aaron Rodgers feels like right now. And it's just to pull off. It's hard to pull off at the age of 40. I do think the Raiders are the best spot for him. We've talked too long about Aaron Rodgers, but there was slander against Arian Foster, who has a podcast himself, by the way. Is Bryce Young too? Okay, this is a good point that I think I discussed when we did that last episode about Bryce Young, but maybe I didn't frame it just quite this way as we talk about his frame. That was no pun intended. It's not about height or weight so much as it's about body type. Young has a slight frame, unlike Breeze or Wilson. Durability is a concern. Given the O-line, he will be hit, and hit often. Highlight reel QBs are fun to watch, but I prefer someone that can take their team down the stretch. Okay, this is I wanted to put this one out here just because there was a theme in a few of the comments over the past few days about Bryce Young being a highlight reel quarterback. I disagree with that. I think he has some nice highlights, but I think what impresses people with Bryce Young is that he can work within structure, but yes, he can also improvise outside of structure. But he's not a highlight reel quarterback on the same order as a Pat Mahomes with the arm or a Lamar Jackson with the legs. I don't think it's fair to call him a highlight reel quarterback. I think what impresses him, what is impressive about him for NFL scouts and whatnot, are all of the things he does in terms of timing, going through progressions, reading defenses, poise and awareness in the pocket. Somebody else had mentioned to me that he was watching a highlight reel of Bryce Young and that he had missed some open receivers over the middle. Two things about that. One, I need some clarification because I don't know why those were on a highlight reel unless it was because he was taking deeper shots somewhere else. So, or perhaps sometimes the guy over the middle isn't in the progression, immediately. So it just doesn't work out that way. Two, yeah, there's going to be times where it's a disadvantage for him to be the height that he is. So it's a consideration. There's no getting around that. It's a matter of, okay, does all the other stuff outweigh the size thing? As far as the frame goes, what Sean and I have talked about is, if you look at Jalen Hurts, Jalen Hurts has been a competitive weightlifter since he was in high school. He squatted 500 pounds when he was a sophomore in high school. He's been working at it a while. We all saw the videos of him squatting and working out in college. But I don't think he has a big frame. I know I'm not talking about his height. I don't think he has a particularly thick frame. I think he's put on a lot of muscle over the years. I don't think Bryce Young can be expected to do that. It would be just like he's had opportunities to do that so far and he hasn't done it. I think the question really becomes, all right, is he a guy that can put on 15 pounds of mass through maturity and lifting weights over the next few years? And is he motivated to do it? And that's where I think the strength coach at Alabama, frankly, is probably going to have some long discussions with various scouts, GMs, people about just, what was Bryce Young like in the weight room? Why, if he wasn't committed to it, why was he not? Was it out of just believing that it wouldn't help him? Because there can be an issue there too. If he's too cocky to realize how small he is, then I would get a little bit nervous. It'd be kind of like when Leonard Fournette during training camp acted like the SEC was harder than the NFL, remember? And then he averaged like 2.4 yards per carry for the next 2 seasons. That's what I would worry about. And as Sid points out, Jalen is 6'1", right? Again, I'm talking about frame. If you look at Jalen Hurts in his actual frame, I think he's way more muscled up than most quarterbacks. And without it, I think he ends up having a slight frame. The quarterback from Tennessee, the backup, is it Josh Dobbs that came in at the end of the year? There's a guy with an example of like a pretty slight frame, but who hasn't worked his butt off the way Jalen Hurts has. I think Jalen Hurts transformed himself into the guy that he is. If you look at, like some bodybuilders when they shrink down, when they're done bodybuilding, you're kind of amazed at how small they are. It's just because they've packed on so much mass into a small frame. That would be interesting if you took like the wrist measurements and all of those things to figure out bone structure. Where's Jalen Hurts compared to Bryce Young on all that? And ultimately it's still obviously a crap show. Terry Kendrick, good question here. I always stumble onto your show. Do you have a regular time to do live shows? Just punched the like button. Thank you. I think that, sorry, somebody else said they can't see the chat. I apologize, Matt Garcia. I don't know what to do about that. I'm trying to start to do them more regularly at noon Central. So that's a vague and loose promise right now, but I'm starting to do my wife, as my wife realized when I do recorded things, I tend to obsess over too many minor details, and it takes me like 5 hours to do a 30-minute recording. So our new mantra is just go live. So I'm going to try to just go live at noon Central as much as possible. To get to another couple, and then I'll get to your guys' comments. I'm always paranoid that I'm not going to have any comments during the live stream, and then I ignore the people who love me and who are here right now. Oh, thanks. I just want to put this out here. Don't ignore my baseball content, everybody, because Derek Reese likes it. I know you're naturally a football guy, but your baseball knowledge and articulation of such are both hella impressive. Proud new subscriber. Respect, Ghost Stros. Thank you. This was cool. I did a piece about, and we'll get back to the Texans and not me stroking myself here. I did a piece on Luis Garcia, and how he's not going to be able to do his Rock the Baby anymore. And I was like, this is another video that honestly, I spent way too much time editing and going through and finding various clips and everything. I got a bunch of copyright strikes from Major League Baseball on this one, which isn't a big deal. I can keep the video up. I just can't make any money off of it. And I was like depressed after I put it up because it got very few views for like 2 days. And then all of a sudden out of nowhere, it just skyrocketed this weekend. So thank you for the baseball compliment. I feel validated. One more from here. Oh, okay. You know what? As I just said, we'll talk a ton of baseball. There's a question about the specificity of the pitch clock. I'm going to tell you, I'm a virgin at this, just like you guys. I've seen it. I've kind of watched some in minor league games when they're using the pitch clock, but when it comes down to the specifics of it all, I only know that you'll be charged with a ball and or a strike if you don't abide by it, and it's very, very effective. It's going to make the games shorter. And a lot of guys now, the younger guys in the league, have played with it at some point. So everybody saw it coming, and it doesn't seem like – the commissioner can do whatever the hell he wants, and nobody's complaining about it as much as I thought they would. So it's just going to be a reality, and I think look, everybody. There was a time when they didn't have a shot clock in basketball. We got used to it. I'm sure there were purists at the time that thought you had to – no, we need to continue to have – teams that are winning score 2 points in the fourth quarter. But ultimately, it was better for the sport. So, as Sid points out, Jalen is 6'1", 224. Right, yeah, that's kind of my point. 6'1", 224, if Jalen Hurts were to have not been a maniac in the weight room, I think it's pretty conceivable that he's added at least 15 pounds of muscle on top of what a normal quarterbacks especially. Quarterbacks, look, at any given time, back in the day, it's less so now, but at any given time when you watch a quarterback during the team workout, he's going to be over with a rubber band doing the old internal-external rotator, and then he'll sit around and talk to one of the female athletic trainers for a while, and then he'll get back to his workout in college. A lot of female athletic trainers in college, not as much in the NFL. There's more now. NFL's entering the 1960s slowly but surely. And but Hurts is packed on a lot of mass. So I don't think he might at the root of it all, he might have more like an Alex Smith type frame, which is still bigger than, because Smith came in at 215, maybe a little bit less than that. So certainly bigger than Bryce Young, but not a really, really thick frame. Let's see. Kendrick, Mike Ladina. If Washington declines Chase Young's fifth-year option, I think we really do need to consider him with a second-round pick or Khalil Mack for a third. Mack's, I don't know about Mack getting a third. Mack hasn't been. I'll check back in on him. I'll do an episode. Let me write that down right now. I'm going to do an episode for pass rushers. So that'd be a good little project to go through and actually check in on everybody, on the guys that are available and how Khalil Mack is doing these days. But it's not. I don't think they need a name guy. I thought that honestly, Jerry Hughes is the exact type of signing that if Jerry Hughes had been signed to a team like the Jaguars, which frankly, if it weren't for the fact that Hughes is from Houston and wanted to play in Houston, I think that's probably where he would have ended up. And I think Jerry might have been ready to retire, except for he had an opportunity to play in his hometown. He's going to be 35 years old. That ended up being a good signing. He was the most effective pass rusher in terms of the entire season. Obo Okoronkwo came along in the second half of the season. I think Obo would be another guy that, the team has some institutional knowledge about him. Other teams might believe it's a little bit of fool's gold because, all right, you're rushing against teams that don't feel an extreme urgency to play their best version of football, all of that. But I like Okoronkwo. The other thing that you'll notice about Okoronkwo is if you go to training camp, the dude just works his butt off. Like he is, if you talk about culture guys and having a guy that might not cost a lot of money, go ahead and if he needs a prove it deal for 1 year to kind of burst on the scene, he's a guy who can be a good rotational player. I think DeMeco will love him. But when you watch him at training camp, like he's constantly near the football just because he's running to the ball until the play is over. So even when it doesn't matter, in drills where it's 3/4 contact, he's running to the ball. Pass rush drill, he's doing his pass rush and sprinting back to the line. He's that kind of guy. So I think he and Jerry Hughes are actually like really good, affordable culture fits right now. Marcus Davenport, a Khalil Mack or somebody like that. Yeah, I could 100% go for that. Oh, I've still got a few more Let's take it to past the trade bait, past the questions. Andrew Luck. Oh, okay. An argument that I didn't like previously is one that actually is starting to make a little bit more sense to me, and I understand what people are trying to say. Where before I always just thought it was a dumb argument. I like Mecole Hardman for the speed, especially if Brandon Cooks is gone. But I also prefer drafting a running back. Okay. So there's our pitch clock question. Sean and I, by the way, are going to be at spring training next week. We get there on Sunday and we're staying through Friday. So we're going to go to a game a day. I think we get to go to an away game at the facility because they're playing the Nationals, but I think it's a Nationals home game. That's the weirdest little thing that I've always wanted to do that I never even knew about until the Astros built their facility. It's no kind of a tradition whatsoever. I just kind of like the idea of going to an away game at a neutral site. So Andrew Luck, which is also actually the Astros site. Andrew Luck was 6'4", 240, lasted less than 90 games in the NFL. So we're talking about Bryce Young here and the size. Every NFL quarterback is a play away from being out for the season. Look at how many of them went down. So yes, people will continually say, as I'm stumping for Andrew Luck, they'll say, hey, big guys get injured too. I 100% get that. I 100% understand that. There are two things you need to think about and consider, though. One, guys like Ben Roethlisberger, Andrew Luck, Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, they stand, and when they were younger especially, took a whole lot of abuse. Like they took hits that, frankly, I don't think Bryce Young can continually take. So their style of play, because of their size, because the size allowed it, also did eventually allow them to get injured more. So with Andrew Luck, even when he was in schemes where he was supposed to be getting rid of the ball quickly, he held on to the ball too long. So yes, his size did not protect him, but that was something that should have been either worked out of him or scouted and accounted for. You can't predict all these things. But I do. So I reject the argument partly because it comes down to a probability play. I think a smaller quarterback, if he were to stand there and take the same hits that Roethlisberger would take, would end up having his brain literally outside his skull at some point. It would ooze out one of his ears because it would just be too much trauma over the course of 10 years. So he definitely has to modify the way he plays. And I think he does show a very good pocket awareness, albeit in college, but still. But I will concede if what you're saying is, hey, look, you can't eliminate the risk altogether anyway. So even if there is more risk with a smaller guy, how much greater is the risk? Because you still have that risk with the bigger guys. I can abide that. I just can't abide the absolutes where people act like size doesn't matter at all. At the very least, you have to modify the way you play. Because otherwise, okay, then fine. A 119-pound quarterback should be just fine in the backfield. If size doesn't matter at all. If he's 119 pounds and he can throw like the Dickens, then you trust that he's going to be healthy and fine. Or a 119-pound running back will be able to endure. It's just there are limits to this, at which point the risks become too great. And I think I feel like Bryce Young is right there on the spot. And I did a whole podcast on this. Go watch the Bryce Young one about it. Doug Flutie's the best comp. I think Flutie unfortunately played half his career in the CFL, so you don't get a true test for exactly how healthy he would have been if he started year after year after year. I don't think anybody would have taken him with a number 1 overall pick, but Bryce Young is a better college player in terms of how it projects to the NFL than Doug Flutie was at the time. Flutie had a hell of a Hail Mary, but that was also back in the time when, for whatever reason, we love to give credit to the quarterback and not the receivers who made incredible plays. And now it just seems like as quarterbacks have changed somewhat, it seems like we're more willing to say like, oh, hey, the receivers got something to do with it too. It's interesting the way that works. So let's see. The Andrew Luck part is true. Okay, couple little parts to clean up from the radio show today. That there's the Andrew Luck point. Is Bryce Young will not be the player people think he is, just like people said about Justin Fields. Now want Chicago to trade him after 2 years. Texans should go for the best player available, then trade the 12th pick to get Richardson. I'm open to Richardson with the 12th. I'm not fantastically crazy about it, but I'm open to it. There was a Flutie discussion that I thought was interesting. Oh, and that was from the Lead Houston, which is a good YouTube channel, local kid that does works real hard. So they were talking about Flutie, and the one guy said, I don't think that throwing 86 touchdowns and 68 interceptions in his career equals being ignored. Dude was a backup for a reason. He completely just over something his half. He couldn't consistently win from the pocket due to his short stature. I don't know. I played against Flutie. I think that they did a really good job in his later years of, getting him out of the pocket at times, accounting for his size. Flutie was the ultimate competitor in a lot of ways. He's a very scrappy dude. I don't think he had a big enough sample size as an actual NFL quarterback, because by the time he came back from the CFL, he was well into his 30s. And I don't think he was on teams necessarily that were conducive to seeing exactly how good he could be. So the Lead Houston said, let me clarify, Flutie was ignored by the NFL multiple times. He was drafted, but by the 1980s draft standards, he only played 4 games. Plus, he was a late draft pick. He was not a first rounder. A horrible team where he replaced the starter, went 6-3 as quarterback, but got replaced. So I think the Lead Houston was pro Doug Flutie. Oh, and then here's the Joan Baez, since we discussed her on the show today. So I was contending to Sean Pendergast that Joan Baez is the sexiest of the 80-plus-year-old women that we've talked about in our 80-plus. This is one of the most, the weirdest things that we've stumbled to on the show is having a hall pass for 80-plus-year-olds. And mine is Joan Baez because she's a pretty enough lady. But more than anything, I've been watching these Bob Dylan documentaries, and she's just freaking brilliant. Like, I don't care what you thought about Joan Baez in the 60s, whether you thought she was a hippie that needed to be run out of the country or a commie or anything. Get over it. That was 50 years ago. The woman is brilliant, and she was talking about Bob Dylan and life and everything else and music in such a way that I was just smitten by her. So I told Sean that if I were going to do an interview, if I had 2 interviews lined up, one with Megan Fox and one with Joan Baez, I think my wife would be more nervous about me spending time alone with Joan Baez. And she would have to accompany me on that interview because she wouldn't trust me. The woman, watch some of these Bob Dylan documentaries. It's absolutely incredible. He was, he still tours like crazy for a guy his age just because he loves the music so much. And when you watch him and Joan Baez early in their careers when they were folk singers, and it was so little about the money, it was really amazing to watch, just how idealistic they were in some ways, but then the public kept trying to turn Bob Dylan into something he wasn't, which was like Bob Dylan didn't want to be a peace activist that got up and gave speeches or that answered for his generation or talked about, various aspects of the political world at all. He wanted to be a storytelling singer. and like the world wouldn't let him do that. They demanded that his lyrics be about very specific things or a protest against nuclear war or nuclear energy and all these things. And it drove him to rock and roll, basically. Instead of driving him to drinking, it drove him to play rock and roll, for which all these damn hippies, peace-loving, gentle hippies, would boo him at jazz festivals or at blues festivals because he was playing electric guitar. Sad. Okay, Fran Tarkenton. Why not Fran Tarkenton? Okay, because I don't think he's as sexy as Joan Baez in his 80s, or however old he was when he was. That's why Joan Baez and not Fran Tarkenton. But as far as football, Fran Tarkenton was essentially the original scrambler, listed as 6 foot 190, play style super similar, had a great and long career in the NFL. Yeah. Tarkenton is a good one. I guess the hard one is, if I recall, Tarkenton's last year in the NFL was 1978. And that's full era, but it's not modern NFL per se. And I think that the reliance on the quarterback then was not as great. You could get away with near murder, as a defensive lineman and what you could do to guys. So Tarkenton took some abuse. A lot of those old school guys obviously took a lot of abuse. What the hell happened? Okay. You guys still here? Everything went dark. Okay. I gotta go. I think I lost my